All right, so that was the ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa speaking a bit earlier on closing the party's 6th National Policy Conference, Sally. Let's bring into the conversation Professor Mncebisi Ndletyana. Just your reflections, Prof. We've heard a lot from the commissions, the various commissions reporting back, but what did you make of the overall wrap-up speech by the President of the ANC?
I thought it was good. There was some kind of agreement on the major things, and that, you know, step aside will be retained. A strong message against corruption. That was a common sense decision, because you can't not punish people who are charged of corruption for a party that is really doing badly. So as a party, they are still intact. They are still functional. There were concerns that there might be some reactions, for instance, earlier, because there were some disagreements over step aside. So the fact that they managed to meet, to have their discussions in a robust and civil manner, it's an indication that they are still coherent somehow. But, you know, it will also depend on what actually comes out. The devil is in the detail.
Yeah.
Unemployment, how thoroughgoing are those recommendations?
Did you get a sense that there was a bit of a give and take, Sally? Sorry.
No, it's fine.
That there's a bit of a give and take, and this was on my part, that was my observation, that those who felt strongly around the non-implementation of certain of the radical economic transformation resolutions had positions that they preferred. The whole issue around the nationalization of the Reserve Bank, but now there's a resolution, a decision coming out of here that says we are not ditching it, we've been urged to pursue it, but the caveat is that we do it in a way that takes into account the realities of our fiscus, because we're going to need to buy the shares. Those who came here who wanted to say, let's revive the Section 25 amendment so we can have expropriation without compensation, they leave here now with a decision that says we must do all we can within the means we have and the, you know, the expropriation bill, for example. So was there a sense of give and take between the various factions on some of the key issues?
It's typical ANC. Everybody must get something. You can't have the party living here with angry people with nothing that they have gained, right? The issue of money to buy the bank was always there. They agreed, for instance, that yes, you will buy, but provided there is money. So buying appeases those who want to take it over, but those who are opposed to it will then raise the issue of money. And this is the thing about the ANC, Thulasizwe, which prevents progress. You want to keep the movement intact, and you now end up having to take resolutions that achieve somewhat that unity, but at the same time, you don't end there. There is still tomorrow and the day after. So those you have promised something will insist on that promise being implemented. That shows reluctance to push the issue right to its own resolution, to say, this thing of buying the bank doesn't work, so we won't buy it, right?
Yeah.
And then call their bluff and see what they say. So there's lack of courage to be confrontational, to push these things right to the end. And so long as you have that in fact is at the center of ANC problems, trying to please everybody, when you know quite well that some of these proposals do not make sense. But because you want these numbers, you want them to still remain within the fold, so you concede to them. And so that's a major problem. You need, if you are certain that this thing cannot work, you need to push ahead and say, no, we can't do it.
So it comes across as a bit fluffy in the end. So let's speak about President Cyril Ramaphosa. As this conference began, we got the news that he had already appeared before the ANC's Integrity Committee. And my understanding is he has to appear again at some point, hasn't answered all the questions that they asked of him. Lots of undercurrents that he might be getting a lot of rivalry as he heads towards the elective conference in December. Do you think that this gathering revealed anything about his popularity and his potential fortunes and how it might play out over the next 5-6 months?
To some degree, it did. There wasn't an open opposition to him. It also shows that they might not have a candidate to stand against him. So there's a sense that let's keep this thing intact to some degree. There's no point in coming up with all sorts of controversial issues, because we also have to think about 2024, right? So they are kind of nursing it along. For now, he looks quite safe. But then we don't know what they might come back saying about Phala Phala, for instance. Why didn't he report the money? Why was the money kept under mattresses and beds? It looked very clumsy. Even my grandmother doesn't do that anymore. Most old people have ATM cards. How is it possible that the president could keep so much money? Well, that's really the curveball that might really do a lot of damage to him. If it comes back saying he shouldn't have kept the money, it was so much money, way beyond what he's supposed to keep at his house, then that's a different ball game. Then it would also depend on what kind of sanctions do those breaches attract. Is it so severe as to say he must step down, or is it a misdemeanor? So I think they are quite concerned. They want to manage it. If I were advising the president, I would also advise him the same thing, to say you need to handle this delicately. There are issues of transparency, obviously, that we need to know as the citizenry, that the president did not deliberately violate the law, that he didn't instruct people to be tortured. Those things, you can't have a president instructing torture. And of course, we did not forget that Fraser reported these things with a particular intention to destabilize. So how truthful are his own revelations? So it is important then to say, let's have some investigation, a thorough one, so that if we make bold decisions, for instance, to say the president must leave, we make those decisions on the basis of tangible evidence of wrongdoing, and the kind of wrongdoing that really then should call for his head.
I think let's take another clip of his closing speech, because I also want to speak about the suggestions of maybe increasing a wealth tax, and that might be one way of creating an ongoing basic income grant, which is something that, of course, would please the electorate. There are so many people who are so desperate. But let's just take a listen to what the president said a little bit earlier this afternoon around the economic problems we are facing.
This policy conference does give us hope for the future of our movement. It has sent a clear signal to our members, our supporters, and indeed to the people of this country, whatever our challenges, whatever our shortcomings, the ANC is alive. It has sent a clear signal that the ANC is committed to consolidate and deepen the freedom for which so many sacrificed their lives. This conference has made plain that the ANC will continue to direct its attention and its significant capabilities towards serving the people of South Africa, particularly the poor, the working class, and the vulnerable. This policy conference gives us encouragement that, yes, the renewal of the African National Congress is unstoppable.
The president saying that the renewal of the African National Congress is unstoppable. But they're going to have to show the electorate that they've got some aces up their sleeve. Do you think, as we get closer and closer to 2024, government is going to have to do something to deal with growing anger and disappointment over the fact that so many people are living in poverty?
Well, the jobs really are the key thing. But unfortunately, you can't create so many jobs between now and 2024. So you'll have to come up with certain measures. Take municipalities, for instance. They pay about, just this financial year alone, they paid about 5 billion rand to consultants to do stuff for which they have hired people.
Yeah.
So that tells you that those who are there do not have the kind of skills that are required to do their jobs. So you could, for instance, say, we'll do a skills audit. Because the issue really at times, it's not about the lack of money. It's about not spending what we have properly. Institutions are very important, right? So you say, okay, we are taking out those who don't have the skills, bringing in skilled people, and that can be done almost immediately because you have tangible evidence of things that are happening here and now. So the practical things that are required are those, even say Wi-Fi, for instance. Some municipalities can install Wi-Fi's. I mean, they were talking about that. So the key visible deliverables can be done between now and 2024. But some of the key issues that need to happen, massive employment, might not happen now.
Yeah.
It also has to do, for instance, with the Zondo Commission. What does the president come out saying? Is he saying they must all be suspended? Should they be prosecuted immediately? And again, is there money, for instance, for the NPA to expand their own investigation capacity? Are the Guptas really coming into the country? So there are certain, low-hanging fruit is the phrase, that they can come up with to build a little bit of encouragement, some excitement that they are on about something.
Yeah.
But the problem then with the ANC is that they also talk big but are very little on action. So if they can have some action, then you change the narrative somewhat.
There were a number of things that I observed here, Prof, that disturbed me. The irony of someone like David Mashobo being the chairperson of the Peace and Stability Subcommittee of the ANC, leading the conversation around safety and security, the performance or otherwise of state security agencies, knowing what we know, the Zondo Commission around those things was one of them. And even going as far as to talk about the implementation of the Zondo Commission report. I found that quite unsettling. But there's also the conversation around chemical castration that came up from the from the Social Transformation Subcommittee. And I don't know, let me suggest to you that my own personal sense of it is, I don't understand under what circumstances a conversation around chemical castration is sort of allowed to continue as if it's something that's actually an option within the constitutional scheme that we have, as if it's actually a path to the solutions that we so desperately need around rape and violence and other forms of violence against women in our country. To me, it just looks like you just want to look busy, but actually you're doing nothing because you know very well this is going nowhere. I don't know what your thinking is. Is this a death of ideas, or is it wanting to make the population believe that we share your outrage, we are doing something, but actually this is no solution at all?
Well, it's not so much death of ideas. It's more an expression of outrage at the enormity of the problem. I mean, 8 women were raped, gang raped, just recently. This continues to happen every day. So people are kind of asking, I mean, what is it that you need to do to put an end to this savagery? And perhaps you need to come up with something as big as this. So ultimately, having sat down, listened to this, having gauged the anger at what is happening, then you might not come with the exact thing, but something equivalent to it to match the outrage. It could be, for instance, more police. It could be increasing sentencing. So at times people, say the most ridiculous things. But we should not dismiss them because of that. We should understand what motivates that.
Sure.
Emotions are not bad. They are very good, because at times if we kind of stay within our heads and try to be rational, we might not empathize enough. So anger and emotions are all good, but ultimately, obviously, we cannot castrate people for that, because we are still a kind of human rights-oriented society. But we have to come up, strengthen measures that are there, and
Sure.
possibly introduce others that are within the human rights regime, for instance.
Yeah.
I think if it's something that is never going to succeed, because it would require a change in the Constitution,
point, yeah.
and it would be too hotly contested by human rights organisations and by evidence that it really doesn't make a difference. What does seem to make a difference is a clear indication that you will get prosecuted if you do wrong. It's not about chemical castration or the death penalty. It's about that culture of you can't do this, you'll get into trouble, you will get caught. But going on something that is ultimately folly and won't ever pass into law, isn't that also just wasting time and resources that should be spent on focusing on things that might make a real difference?
I don't think, on the floor you have all sorts of people, Sally. Some of them perhaps are not as thoughtful as you are. So they raise these things generally, right? But one of the things that could be done, for instance, take the issue of domestic violence. A wife goes to the police station and say, I've been beaten by my husband, this and that. And you have some idiotic policeman who says, well, he's your husband. Or maybe, she doesn't want to have sex. That night the fellow wants it. And that policeman says, but you can't say no to your husband. That's wrong, obviously, because and that then speaks to the level of consciousness about gender equality, respect for women. So it then means that you would have to take seriously the issue of education amongst police people. When wives come to report these things, police must take them seriously. If you don't, there must be a report, and you must be taken to task for not doing that as a police person. So I'm saying there are certain realistic measures that can be undertaken to meet this sense of outrage halfway, without necessarily having to go to the extreme for these draconian measures.
Yeah, and I think, Sally, you capture my point very well, in that we've talked about what the solutions are, some of the solutions, not all of the solutions, because it's a deeper issue in society, this whole issue around violence against women. We've had that gender-based violence and femicide summit, and those decisions that were taken there and commitments that were made there, that could be a step in that direction. When you come out and you are outlandish, saying something that you know very well, that you would need to drop dignity, for example, as one of our values in our constitution. And to do that, you would need a super majority. You sit here, you allow these people to daydream about something that you know very well will never happen in this country. Anyway, let's move on. Let's talk about the other issues, Prof. If the cry was that the ANC is out of step and out of touch with the crisis of the moment, on issues such as violence, general violence now in society and crime, and there were these incidents that were happening there, the latest being in Marion Hill in KwaZulu-Natal overnight, but also that rape, that gang rape of those women in Krugersdorp, and issues such as energy and load shedding, and now the issues around communities raising issues of migration. From the speech of the president, did you get a sense of, other than giving a broad commitment to we ought to accelerate, we will accelerate towards resolving these, did you get a sense that speaks to the urgency with which communities want some of these issues to be addressed?
I think so. They were very alarmed. They are very alarmed. Issues of immigration, for instance, that came up quite forcefully. That we have porous borders, people are coming in, taking jobs. There are certain things that were said in this conference that would not have been said in an ANC conference 5 years ago about immigrants. because the ANC has always been wary of being seen to be anti-foreigners, for instance, because it's a Pan-Africanist movement. Mashaba here in Joburg is the first one to raise this issue quite sharply, I think in the 2019 elections, or I can't remember. And the ANC initially did not want to join that debate. Mashaba would go to Hebrew and flush out all illegal immigrants and all that. Eventually, when the ANC picked up that this was resonating, actually, they started talking about it.
And they put it in their 2019 manifesto.
They spoke about it tentatively, but now they are out and out talking about it. Mainly because partly of crime, this rape business, potentially foreigners. And so there's a heightened sensitivity that you need to act, and you need to act urgently. And that's, it helps to have branch leaders coming to conferences like this, mingling with these high-ups in the ANC. They may not articulate their views well. They might not speak in civilized tones. They might be a little bit vulgar. But don't take them literally. Try to understand where that comes from. And perhaps you might translate what they say into something that is decent. For me, that's the beauty of conferences like this. However much they can fight. Fighting is very good, actually. Instead of coming here to pretend that we're
coddling each other.
Because there are real things, there are real differences out there. You and I would say, no, we are a Pan-Africanist organization. We can't be. We've lived in New York here and there. To be anti-foreigners is to be backward, this and that. But these folks are feeling some of these effects that, I can't get employed because of this and that. But then that says, it doesn't say get rid of foreigners. It says regulate your borders more effectively, because South Africa needs skills. And we are, frankly, in a tough neighborhood. The economies around us are not working well. Any human being anywhere else in the world will always go where there is likely to be prosperity. Self-preservation is the most basic instinct. They'll cross the borders, right? So to think that we will not have illegal foreigners coming through, it's idiotic. The issue is they're here. How do we block them, especially those who are not meant to be here? But at the same time, how do we attract those with skills? There are many Africans who are wanting to come back to their continent. They are elsewhere. And Johannesburg, South Africa, remains the beacon of the continent. So how do we bring this? We might have to imagine ourselves, perhaps reimagine ourselves as an immigrant nation of sorts. Of course, countries that are born out of a nationalism, this and that, there's a strong sense of nationhood that we got our country back, and we want to keep others out. But realistically speaking, we don't have the kind of skills that we need to get this economy going, and we have people with skills who are dying to come in here. Open it up. That's what it means.
It's a difficult one because in my mind, we should look at who is acting in a criminal way first, and then let's see if there's a trend in terms of them being more foreigners than local people, for example. And my worry, while I see the fury of people around potentially a group of foreign criminals, or criminals who happen to be foreign, possibly involved in this, the reality is what we've seen with these mass arrests since the Krugersdorp rape, what I'm reading today, and of course I haven't seen confirmation on this from the police, is that of the sort of 60 to 70 people arrested, they are being arrested because they're undocumented, not because they've been specifically linked as yet to this horrific crime. Now, some of them may well be, and it's not to pussyfoot around that. We also know, though, that this was apparently a music video being shot by a group of Nigerians who were there to make a music video. So the issue of foreigners, for me, has to take second place. And that's not to have a lack of sympathy for people who feel that this group of foreigners is encroaching on my turf, this group of foreigners is threatening me. It is a very delicate balance, and the reason I'm treading so carefully through it is as soon as you start scapegoating one particular group
Yeah.
because of who they are,
Yeah.
we're looking at what happened in Uganda when the Indians were chucked out. We're looking at what happened in Germany when the Jews were targeted.
Yeah.
And if you get into a situation where people react towards a sort of populist move, then we're heading for polarization and we're heading for a different kind of trouble.
Yeah.
So on that scale, where are we as South Africa, would you say? Are we still fairly, and there's nothing wrong with expressing anger, and sometimes we say things that might be a little bit unfair to one particular group. Where are we on that scale in terms of populism?
You see, it's not so much these illegal folks. It's about weaknesses in the system. It's about corruption. These guys can buy IDs. They can bribe police people, for instance, at the borders. Perhaps there are some borders, parts of it, that are not guarded. Yesterday, for instance, we were talking about drones, Daniel producing drones.
Yeah, remember I said I couldn't quite remember what they wanted to repurpose. Looking at border control with drones, etc., that sort of technology. Yeah.
So you might not have to have 500,000 people manning every part of the border. You just simply have drones. Daniel has that capacity. So it then means that at least you are able to monitor, identify people and all that. Then you go to Home Affairs and say, Home Affairs, your systems must work better. They must be digitized.
And to be fair, we have seen some busts within Home Affairs of those scams that have been operated with the collusion of some corrupt people within that department. So there is some sense of progress, but there's much more to be done, obviously.
So it is then not so much that these people are bad. As I said earlier, they'll come to South Africa. They go anywhere. They go to New York. Europe faces this problem. It's a global problem. We are not unique, so we shouldn't beat ourselves so badly. But what each country does is that you have proper monitoring on the borders. And we've been failing to do that. That's our major failure. And we can expect them to continue trying to come into the country because they're being pushed from their own countries. And this country looks attractive from a distance. So we need to do what all other countries do, reinforce monitoring and all that.
Yeah. In fact, the conversation went as far as to say we may have to, amend our signature, for lack of a better word, enter a reservation of sorts in some of the international statutes and treaties that we've signed up to on matters such as migration, to say we agree to the treaty, but with the condition that we would like to do X, Y, and Z, and we remain signatories. Anyway, Prof, thank you. I think you are due for a break. I don't know how much of a break you're going to get. If one thing we can celebrate is the opportunity to think through the issues in one concerted way, and actually, almost like we're all forced into one big indaba by the ANC for the last 3 days, and we discuss solutions, etc. We agree, we disagree, and that's to be welcomed.
I was delighted to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Let's take another listen to what the President had to say, and this, of course, is a big issue facing all of us. The ANC says it has made recommendations to government to address the country's rising cost of living. Food and fuel prices have skyrocketed in recent months. Of course, many people unable to afford the basics. Of course, let's look forward, though. Of course, next week we're seeing a drop in the fuel price. Petrol going down by at least R1.30 a litre. But still, the broader context is times are very tough. Let's listen to